In this video, I will share with you how to draft and sew a wrapped sleeve, which is known as a tulip sleeve. So you want to keep on watching. You are definitely welcome to my channel. Let's get right into this video. As always, I have my pattern paper and I'm just going to fold it into two equal parts this way. And for this tutorial, I'll be needing my armhole curve, I'll be needing my hip curve, as well as my straight row, definitely my pencil and marker. I'll start by marking my starting point like this. And right from this starting point, I'll mark down 3/3/4 inch, mark it as well here, and put it into a straight line. Now with this sleeve, we'll definitely need the round measurement of our top. I'll be working with this cowl top, and I'll just measure from the side seam to the shoulder seam line of any of them. I'm measuring the back and I have 8/3/4 inch. I went on to add extra 2 inches to whatever I had, which is 10/3/4 inch. I then went ahead to approximate it to 11 inches. I intend gathering the crown area of my sleeve, which is why I added extra 2 inches to whatever armhole measurement I had. If you do not intend to do so, then maintain yours just like mine, 8/3/4 inch. Okay, so I'll tilt my tape measure from the top, which is my starting point, down to my cap's height and locate 11 inches, and which is what I marked. Okay, I'll then go ahead to divide my distance, which is still 11 inches, by 3. I had 3.6 inches. So whatever inches you have, for instance, once again, if I had used 8/3/4 inch, that is what I'll use as my distance and divide it by 3. So these are my divisions. The first one, I'll go up by 1/2 inch, and the lower one, I'll go down by 1/4 inch. I'll pick my armhole curve, okay, and meet the edge of the armhole curve with my 1/2 inch. Make sure it also meets my starting point. Basically, make sure all these points meet and mark it out like you see. So this curve is my back curve. Okay, so I'll go ahead to use this curve part of the armhole curve to blend these points together, so there will be no break point. Now for the 1/4 inch down that I marked is going to serve as the front. I'll still make use of my armhole curve. All I'm going to do is connect it to that 1/2 inch point as well, this way. Okay, so I'll pick my armhole curve, make sure the armhole curve now this time around meets the 1/4 inch and blends into the 1/2 inch. I'll turn my curve this way, also blend it into that 11 inches point like this. Do you see that? You can as well use this side of the curve to also curve it. All right, so this green line is my back sleeve. Okay, and here is the front. Next, you would want to measure your round arm to determine your round arm of the sleeve. Okay, you might also want to add a little ease, but before we do that, right down from my cap's height, I'll mark 2.5 inches. I'll go ahead to draw that line down like this. I'll also mark the same 2.5 inches here and connect them together. This is also a way of determining the length of my sleeve, so yours can be longer, way longer than mine. Okay, so on this line, I'll put in my round arm measurement. At this point, I actually wanted my sleeve to look very free, so I just marked about 1.5 inch from my side seam and just connected that point to the top part of my sleeve like this, and that is my round sleeve, which is really much free. So depending on what you want, you do so. Okay, so we have our basic sleeve. All right, I went ahead to cut off the front part of the sleeve, right, to determine the front. I couldn't record that side, but I went ahead to cut it out. All right, so this is my back and that is my front. All right, now from the center of my sleeve I marked it, so I know where it is. I'll mark 3.5 inches both towards the front and towards the back part of the sleeve. Okay, so now we are going to go ahead to curve our tulip sleeve. You can determine how much more overlap you want your sleeve to look like. So yours can be more than these 3.5 inches as well as less than 3.5 inches. So these are my 2 points on both the front and back. I'll go ahead to use my hip curve. If you look closely, I added 3/4 inch side seam allowance. So away from that side seam allowance, I'll just mark about 1/2 inch. Okay, I want to try excluding the side seam allowance. All right, so I'll just connect from that 3.5 inches and just curve it however I want. I mean, you can actually curve it anyhow you want. Okay, so I just used 2 inches on my curve as a guideline, and I use that same 2 inches on the other side of my 3.5 inches, that is on the back. This way one would not be much more curved than the other. I'll also make sure I exclude my side seam allowance. I'll pick marker to outline the front part of my sleeve. We can't obtain the 2 overlap sleeve on one main basic sleeve. Okay, so just as I've outlined one side, the other side I'll go ahead to trace it. This will be done on another pattern paper. Meanwhile, I'll also trace out my center of the sleeve, okay, and also trace out the circumference of the crown of the sleeve. I mean, just like you see, right? Then the side seam as well. Then I can go ahead to trace the line I have. So having traced out everything, I'll go ahead to cut out the back piece. I'll then grab my basic sleeve, the previous sleeve we drafted, and cut out the front. I'll add joining allowance to the crown of the sleeve, okay, on the fabric. So these are my 2 pieces coming together to form one sleeve at the notch, which is the center, and I'll make gathering at the top part like this. Okay, so I'll cut 2 of each. If you want to self knitting or line knit, then you have to cut 4 each. Okay, so I'll go ahead to grab my material, fold it into 2. We'll cut 2, so we'll have to fold the fabric into 2. Then I'll go ahead to place my patterns on it, pin them together. Then I'll go ahead to cut, but I'm not going to add allowance to the hem of the sleeve, okay, because I'll be binding it. Okay, but if you would use the same fabric to line it, then you have to add 1/2 inch to the hem. I'll go ahead to also add 1/2 inch to the crown, that's joining allowance. I'll do same to the other. We've already added side seam allowance, right? Hence why I didn't add side seam allowance again. Now this is the material I'll be cutting on bias to knitting the edge of my sleeve, I mean the hem of my sleeve. All right, so I'm going to fold it into 2 like this, okay, and cut out. After folding into 2, I'll cut it into 2 again, right? I'll split it into 2, one will knitting the other sleeve. Now what I intend to do is to just bind it with the material, right? But we need to join the side seam first before we finish it with the bias. First off, I'll mark the center of my sleeve like this and notch it. I'll also do the same thing to the other sleeve, okay? So I'll pick each of the sleeve, one front, one back, and meet them by the notch, okay? So I'll just go ahead to pin round like this to keep it in place. I'll grab both sides of the sleeve like this and go ahead to stitch with my side seam allowance. I'll neaten the edge of my sleeve by grabbing just 1/4 inch of part of the side seam allowance and stitching at the edge. This method is edge stitching. Now sometimes you might be unable to determine the front armhole and the back armhole of your sleeve, so I decided to make a notch, just one notch on the back, okay, to determine the back of my armhole. Now I'll go ahead to unpin the sleeve. This way I'll have my sleeve together like this. I'll also grab my bias fabric, okay. Now we want to work on the hem of the sleeve. Just to neaten the hem of the sleeve, I'll fold one of my bias together like this, so one side and some fold. The part which is not on fold, I'll meet it with the hem of my sleeve, okay. Take it to the machine and stitch just about 1/4 inch. Just so you know, the total length of the bias I cut is 2 inches, okay. So now I'm making this stitch from the wrong side of my sleeve, okay. After back stitching, I'll cut off excess, trim off excess from the 1/4 inch as well, notch round, and I'm just going to fold it this way to the right side. Just fold it this way with the excess in between the bias. All right, so I'll just go ahead and make a top stitch. So after doing this, I went ahead to make a second top stitch at the edge of my bias this way, and then this is how it looks like. My side seam is neat, and I'll go ahead to meet the notches again. This is my back, right? So for this tulip sleeve, I'll make sure that the back overlaps to the front, okay. So I'll meet them by the notch, making sure the back overlaps. All right, then I'll go ahead to stitch them together. I'll use this opportunity to stitch with a gathering stitch, okay. So that will be 2 rows. Here I've made my gathering stitches. I'll pick those at the bottom part of my stitch, and that is what's going to help me to gather. I'll gather from both sides, okay. And I'll just pick the top part to lock my gathers afterwards. Right, whenever you gather, the top part of your thread helps you to just lock it in place, then there will be no movement. I'll be attaching my sleeve to a top, so after doing all the gathering, I'll go ahead to grab my top and locate my armhole. We do know the front armhole is always different from the back armhole, hence the sleeve as well. So I'll make sure that each of them match. I'll also make sure the side seam of my sleeve aligns with the side seam of my top, and also make sure the notch part of my sleeve aligns with the shoulder seam line of my top. We've come to the end of today's tutorial. If you enjoyed watching and learning, give this video a thumbs up, do comment, share, and turn on your notification bell. Make sure to also subscribe to the channel if you are here too. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.